Professor Dr. Vincent Correia is a professor of public law at the University of Paris, France. He is also a visiting lecturer at the LLM Advanced Studies in Air and Space Law program at Leiden University, Netherlands. His work is on public law and aviation law, with a focus on European Union external relations in the field of civil aviation and their interaction with international air law. Vincent Correia has published several articles and case commentaries on aviation law in English and French legal journals. He is a member of the Board of Editors of Air and Space Law and Aviation and Space Journal and the European Journal of Consumer Law. Professor Vincent is a member of the Board of European Air Law Association. He is also a member of the International Law Association. I call upon Professor Dr. Vincent Correia today to speak on the topic, can the COVID-19 crisis halt the liberalization process of international aviation?
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, dear colleagues, dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to participate. As Dr. Folke, please excuse my English and my very strong French accent. On this respect, I'm also very happy to see, many friends being participating to this conference. Of course, Dr. Folke, it's always a pleasure. I hope that we will be able to travel soon and see each other in the next month, as well as Professor Pieralini. And I want to congratulate again the organizers for setting up this conference. And I guess that having different views from different parts of the world will help all of us to have a better understanding of what is going on right now. And following what has just been said by Dr. Folke, I really believe that the COVID-19 crisis really reflected the problem of the lack of harmonization at the international level. And I hope that we can discuss it during the questions afterwards. But I think that ICAO in this respect and many governments acted in a very individual and separated ways when we most needed international cooperation. So that kind of conference is another way of cooperating by exchanging ideas. And so that's why I'm very happy to be here. Well, my presentation, of course, as was said, is about, the consequences of the COVID-19. It was presented before that what are the current consequences from the passengers' rights, stated law, and so on. It was also presented the lack of proper sanitary solutions at the international level. I want to look a bit further in terms of liberalization. The topic of my presentation is obviously an open question. Would the COVID-19 crisis halt the liberalization process in the following months or following years? Let me be clear, I would personally prefer to say that no, and that we will go on with this process of liberalization at the international level. But I think that the current crisis, and most importantly, the reaction of governments would delay the progress that has been made so far towards a more liberalized market at the international level. And maybe we can address it afterwards as well, but I think that it can affect liberalization process at the national level. Why do I think so? Well, for several reasons that I will try to address very briefly during the 15 minutes that have been allocated to me. First of all, because the liberalization process that we are really hoping for many years in the academic discussion and many airlines have been advocating for, even if we all have in mind the success of the American open skies policy, for instance, we can see that the progress has been quite slow if we take a broader picture and if we take the higher perspective. And even if we have a look at the actual state of play when it comes to liberalization, we can say that it's still far from being complete. For instance, the US open skies policy is not as liberal as it may seem. It is still based on bilateral agreements between, most of the time, uneven partners. There are still restrictions on ownership and control, still restrictions when it comes to access to the domestic market. The same goes for the EU external aviation policy, for instance, which is liberal in nature, but requires a lot of concessions from its partners, most notably when it comes to the so-called regulatory convergence at the European level, which is basically exporting EU rules to the rest of the world. And it makes this process very difficult to export to third countries. And I can multiply the examples. Some progress is being made in Southeast Asia, but well, the Chinese giant, I would say, is still reluctant to embrace full liberalization. In Africa, the Yamoussoukro process, which aims at liberalization at the entire African level, well, is still delayed years after years, and the only progress is being made at sub-regional level. In South America, some progress has been made as well. Colombia, we know the Comunidad Andina, for instance, but well, the giants, Argentina and Brazil, are still, even if Brazil made some changes regarding ownership and control, are still reluctant to embrace a full liberalization. And from general perspective, when we have a look at the bilateral agreements at the international level, we are still fighting and struggling for fifth freedom rights, while a full liberalization would go up to cabotage and opening ownership and control. And ownership and control is another important issue for the topics I will address afterwards regarding COVID-19, because in the major, in most of the countries in the world, ownership and control is still restricted. Well, the most topical example being the United States, only allowing 25% of foreign ownership and control. And in other countries, such as, for instance, China or Japan, it's still limited. And even in the most liberal ones, such as the European Union countries, or in some countries in South America, most of the time there is a cap, a limit of 49% of foreign ownership and control, while many advocate for further liberalization of this. And why am I introducing all these questions regarding liberalization? Because we know for sure, and this has been ascertained by economic studies for many years, that when the air transport market has been liberalized, it leads to increased offer, lower fares, increase in demand, and basically, just to summarize it, a bigger competition, but within a bigger market, And when we are thinking right now about how the aviation industry should recover after the end of the crisis, or when this situation is at least controlled, I really believe that beyond governmental intervention, the sector will have to find ways to earn money to recover. And I think, in this respect, that the current crisis revealed that many governments were willing to intervene, basically, as we all know, to save airlines in a very unprecedented situation. And this is obviously good. Don't misunderstand me in this respect, because the industry can only recover if the airlines didn't go out of business. But I think that this renewed interest of government, and I'm talking here about most notably European, American, and in other countries as well, who were more in favor of liberalization, would maybe, halt the liberalization process and progresses that we've seen in the previous years. And for this, I think that there are 4 or 5 threats or elements that lead me to think and to believe this. The first threat is obviously the risk of bankruptcies that is still faced by many airlines. You probably all know this. Many airlines already have gone under the protection of Chapter 11 in the United States. LATAM, Avianca, Virgin, for instance. Some others simply went out of business. I have in mind, for instance, Flybe. South African Airways as well has stopped operating, but we don't know what will be the situation in the future. The main question here is government will maybe be reluctant in the future, just after the end of the crisis, to further open the markets if there is no longer any strong national airline able to compete in this bilateral market. The second threat, and this leads me to something that has already been touched upon by Laura Pieralini. The second threat is directly connected to the first one. It is the massive investment that have been done by many governments, obviously not by all, and this is another problem, but massive investments that have been done by some governments in order to save their national airlines. Here, as it was mentioned previously, Singapore was granted $13 billion. American Airlines received almost $6 billion. Lufthansa, 9 billion euros. Air France-KLM, 7 billion euros. Well, I'm not entering into the details here, but maybe during the questions afterwards. But these different measures of support have been either in loans or in equity investment in the airlines. But this is not really the most important aspect here. What really matters is that a reasonable government wants its loan to be reimbursed at some point. Well, normally should be, at least in accordance with the European stated rules. And any investor in equity would normally, well, have some return and some profits in medium or long term. And from my perspective, the governments in the years to come, and most notably the governments which helped these airlines, will only support liberalization when they will be sure that it will not affect the airlines that they have saved previously. And how can you make sure of this? It's basically by opening the market with a country whose airline is maybe not in, well, in a very good shape, in a very good situation. But those countries, normally, they will not want to open their markets because they know that they will be crushed in this competition, that they will have problems because the other airlines has been, well, supported and financially backed up by their governments. The third element, and I'm saying that I'm slightly running out of time, so I will maybe speed up a bit. The third element here is that we've seen that the levels of intervention of governments have been totally different from one country to another, that there is no harmonization at the international level when it comes to public support to airlines. I think that the crisis will increase the difference between, would say, rich airlines supported by rich countries and not so rich airlines not supported and not backed up by their countries. And when there is, and this we know since the 40s, when there is, difference in situation between two partners in bilateral agreement, what is the best way to protect the weakest part of the agreement? Well, it has traditionally been the good old Bermuda style agreement with restriction on capacities, frequencies, and fares. If your airline is recovering after the crisis, of course, you want to make sure that you are sharing the market on in a way such as to protect your national carrier. The fourth threat to liberalization, in my view, at least from a European perspective, and it's still connected to the huge amount of money that has been provided by many European governments to save the airlines, is that it, from an aeropolitical perspective, is that it totally undermines the European discourse on fair competition and level playing field. For many years, the European Union has been promoting an approach where airlines should compete on the level playing field even when it comes to public support. And it was basically directed towards Gulf carriers in order to, well, make competition more balanced. How can they right now support fair competition at the international level when we know that many airlines have been helped? And for some of them, and well, some of my friends here know that I like making enemies and saying what I think. Some airlines which are currently seeking for governmental support should have been out of business without the COVID-19 crisis happening. And for some European governments, the coronavirus crisis has been a very good excuse to provide some airlines financial support when they have been not profitable for years. And here I'm looking maybe at Alitalia, for instance. So how can the European Commission afterwards come to third country and say, we promote liberalization, we promote regulatory convergence, we promote fair competition when it comes to state aid, for instance, when the EU government are massively supporting some airlines and with the benediction of the European Commission. So just to wrap up and finish, because I'm really running out of time in this for time being, I think that the renewed interest of governments for aviation is not in itself a bad thing, because it recalled to many governments that aviation is extremely important when it comes to connectivity, when it comes to employment, jobs, tourism, and further growth of the economics of a country. Governments had to intervene, and many did. But once they did so, some airlines which were from, well, under, I would say, more liberal regulatory regime, become again subject to the considerations of sovereignty. And what we know is that when states are taking into account more sovereignty than economics and efficiency, this leads to more well, protectionist behavior. And this is the major problem from my perspective in the long run. To recover, the industry will have to generate profit as soon as possible, while it appears that that many governments will have a protectionist stance, and I really believe that, well, with my traditional optimism, I think that the liberalization process will be severely impaired, at least for 5 or 10 years, because the coronavirus crisis will maybe give a second youth to the very old Bermuda model. I hope I'm mistaken. I hope I'm wrong. I think this is the duty of academics to be mistaken sometimes, but and I hope as well that it will raise questions in the following minutes. And with this, I thank you all very much for your very kind attention.